Hello everyone, I'll be showing you how to paint with tea and coffee. To start things off, I'll go over the material list. First, you'll be needing some paper towels. Here I have some blue shop rags. Then you'll be needing some watercolor paper or mixed media paper. In my case, I'm using watercolor paper inside of my journal here. Then you'll be needing a palette. This is one with some deeper wells in it. You'll be needing a variety of watercolor brushes. I have a couple of rounds of different sizes and a flat brush. And then of course you'll be needing some tea and coffee. You see I made these ahead of time so that they've cooled down. And you'll be needing a cup of clean water to clean your brushes. Next is not required, but I recommend a bottle with a needle tip so that you can slowly add water to your tea and coffee. And then last, I have this scrap piece of watercolor paper so that I can test out some swatches. Next, let's talk about how to prepare our tea and coffee. You can see here with this coffee, I have an instant brand. I choose instant because it's going to dissolve well in hot water. Next, I have just a couple of tea bags. If you have loose leaf tea, that works too. And then I have 2 paper cups where I'm going to be placing my tea and coffee. And then off to the side, I just have some water boiling in this electric kettle. Alright, once my water is done boiling, I'm going to add that to my 2 cups. First with the tea, I'm going to add just enough water to cover the top of the tea bags. And then same thing with the coffee, I'm going to add just enough water, not too much, so that I can dissolve the instant coffee. And then I'm going to give it a little stir so that there are no clumps inside. And then I'm going to set these 2 cups aside because I'm going to want them to cool down. I don't want to paint with them while they're both hot. Alright, to get things started, I'm going to wet my brush with water and then I'm going to separate the tea into 3 different wells of my palette. This way I can vary up the value range of my tea. I'll be adding water into each of the wells. So I'll be adding 1 drop of water to the first well, 3 drops of water to the second well, and then 5 drops of water to the third well. The value of your tea all depends on the ratio between the water and the tea itself. Sort of like how watercolor works, where if you add more water to your watercolor paint, it will become more transparent. If you add more paint to your watercolor paint, it becomes more opaque. And I'll be doing the same thing with the coffee as well. Alright, I'm going to start painting my swatches now. I'm going to dip my brush into the clean water and then actually going to start with the tea straight from the cup. This is going to be my darkest value because there is no added water to it. And I'm going to clean my brush in between, dipping it into the clean water and then wiping it with my blue shop rag. And then I'm just going to continue as I move along the different swatches. As you can see, the color is already lighter just from 1 drop of water added to the tea. Very transparent compared to the first swatch. And here I'm just making notes for myself just so I can keep track and reference if I need to look what the tea looks like depending on how much water was added into it. So just a good idea to keep notes. Now I'm going to start swatching my coffee. As you can see, it's already much darker than the tea. And I'm going to repeat the same process, cleaning my brush in between, painting these swatches just so that the previous swatch color does not interfere. Then I'm going to do the same thing, writing notes below each swatch so I know which one is which, how much water is in compared to the coffee. Earlier, I talked about how tea and coffee behaves similarly to watercolor. Right now I'm going to show how the techniques translate over to tea and coffee. So I lay down my darkest value of coffee and then I dip my brush in water and I'm pulling the coffee to the right, and you can see that it becomes more of a gradient. It gets lighter as you move to the right. And there you have it. Those are the basic steps of how to paint with tea and coffee. And to wrap this video up, I have this time-lapse video of a painting I did in my journal. I used various watercolor techniques. So for example, I used a wet into wet wash to cover the entire page. I used a heat gun to dry certain parts of the painting quicker so that I can work on top of it. So as you can see, it's very similar to watercolor. You can work in layers so that you can create value and depth. And that concludes how I paint with tea and coffee.